You guys know the Pokemon Patrat? It's the early route rodent Pokemon in Unova, similar to Rattata, Sentret, Zigzagoon, and Bidoof before it. Those latter four Pokemon are some of the most memed Pokemon in existence and appear in multiple games, except in the case of Patrat. It was in both Generation 5 games where it debuted, Black and White 1, then Black and White 2, then wasn't catchable in a Pokemon game again for about 13 years. So what's up with Patrat? At least its evolution, Watchog, was catchable on one route in Pokemon X and Y with a rather rare 10% encounter rate, but what did Patrat do? I could go on some overanalyzed and most likely wrong YouTuber interpretation that goes something along the lines of, well, Unova is based on America, which is far away from the countries other regions are based off of in the Pokemon world, so it would make sense for Unovan Pokemon to be rarer in other games because the region should be so far away, but that's not exactly the case. There's plenty examples of Gen 5 Pokemon such as Scraggy, Girder, and Venipede which appear in multiple games since Black 2 and White 2. Actually, now that I look at it, Generation 5 Pokemon tend to be pretty sparse with how many games they were included in, but not very many were completely neglected like Patrat. And if you ask me, this guy is kinda silly, like he just looks around like this and is always on patrol, and maybe its more serious nature compared to other early route rodents is why it never got the same treatment since, I mean, look at Bidoof, it's kind of derpy. Look at Sentret, it's kind of derpy. Look at Zigzagoon, it's very derpy. Look at Patrat, it looks like a crack addict. It also evolves into this thing, which, look, I'm not gonna shame anybody for liking a certain Pokemon, but if Watchog is one of your favorite Pokemon, then you're just asking to be made fun of. Some of Patrat's Pokedex entries state how it's extremely cautious and always on the lookout, so maybe that's why it skipped like 4 generations of Pokemon in a row. It was really cautious because it didn't want to be seen in Sword and Shield, I guess. But there's Pokemon that were introduced after Generation 5, which appeared in more games than Patrat even, which I find kind of hilarious. Look at Fletchling, for example, which is similar to Patrat in the sense of they're both one of the first wild Pokemon you'd encounter in the games they were first introduced in. Fletchling appeared in Sun and Moon and the Ultra games, Sword and Shield through the DLC, it skipped Legends Arceus and Let's Go, of course, then returned again in Scarlet and Violet, meaning it came back for all but one possible game it could have appeared in, and Patrat wasn't in any of those. Let's take a break from Generation 5 for a second now to make sure you click that like button and subscribe, then also go back to Generation 4. Gen 4 are some of the most iconic Pokemon to me because, I mean, I just played Pearl way too much as a kid, so I have a lot of memories on Gen 3 and Gen 4 specifically, and I just love this Pokedex. Now, since I played Pearl version, I had access to the version-exclusive Pokemon Glameow, while Diamond had access to Stunky as their exclusive. Both of these Pokemon were prominently used by Team Galactic, so no matter which version of the games you played, you were bound to see both quite a few times throughout the story. I always remembered Purugly more because Mars from Team Galactic used one in the Valley Windworks, which was the first time you ever fought a Team Galactic admin in those games. Purugly and its pre-evolution Glameow aren't too common in the Sinnoh games in the wild though, and typically wouldn't be encountered until after you already had 4 gym badges or so, although you could also find Purugly later on in Route 229, which is kinda cool. And then after Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, they made the Purugly line of Pokemon so rare for no real reason. Purugly isn't a particularly good Pokemon, but in Generation 5 it can only be found through hidden grottos in White 2 only, in a grotto only accessible through a FunFest mission which requires other players, or in the Dream World, meaning nobody is catching a Glameow in White 2 after like 2014 since the Dream World is shut down. Then it wasn't in Pokemon X and Y, but was in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire through Mirage Forest and Mirage Islands, which were kind of like hidden grottos, but a little bit less rare, and it was unlikely you'd find a Glameow or Purugly through regular gameplay in Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire. Then they just weren't in any Generation 7 game, they weren't in Sword and Shield, they returned to Shining Pearl, not Brilliant Diamond because they were a Pearl exclusive originally, and were a bit more common in Pokemon Legends Arceus, then just weren't in Scarlet and Violet or Legends ZA at all. Like, I know, it's just a Glameow, I doubt anybody really cares too much, but why is it just brushed to the side? I don't know if brushing a mediocre Pokemon like Glameow to the side like this and making it catchable in some games at a rare rate is better than just completely ignoring it like with Patrat, but both of them really confuse me. And the weirdest part is that Glameow's counterpart, Stunky, is just a lot more common. It wasn't in Platinum version as well, and was a hidden grotto exclusive in Black 2 only, but it was in Pokemon X and Y on Route 11, it was very common in Sword and Shield, a game Glameow wasn't even catchable in, then was a Scarlet exclusive, while Glameow just wasn't in the game at all. Typically, version exclusives and counter Pokemon like this kind of stick throughout the whole entirety series of Pokemon, so it's very strange to see an old version exclusive just get dropped and the other version exclusive still stay and still be a version exclusive. Okay, that's enough rambling about a random cat. I do like cats, especially your mom's, but let's move on to Generation 6 and talk about another Pokemon I thought would be very popular, but just wasn't. Back when Pokemon X and Y were coming out, they teased how you can ride a Skiddo around. This was a precursor to Ride Pokemon we later saw in Pokemon Sun and Moon. As an X and Y, Ride Pokemon were limited to very specific areas only, and it was pretty much just Skiddo, Rhyhorn, and like Mamoswine. I thought you'd be able to ride Skiddo like it was a bike all throughout the Kalos region, kind of like you can do with Tauros in Pokemon Sun and Moon through the Alola region, but that just wasn't the case. Skiddo and its evolution Go-Go were very prominently featured throughout X and Y's lifespan, but then they just didn't appear again until Scarlet and Violet. It was a relatively common Pokemon in Scarlet and Violet, then it did return in Legends ZA, but in only one specific area of the game, and you can't even ride them anymore. Now when it comes to forgotten Pokemon, I'm sure the ones most people think of are the elemental monkeys from Generation 5, Simisage, Simipour, and Simisear. They get joked around a lot, and out of the 1,025 Pokemon that currently exist, they all rank in the bottom 25 for most visited Pokemon pages on Bulbapedia's website. The Pokemon that consistently ranks at the bottom though is Clang, and middle evolutions kind of get forgotten because everyone wants to look at the base form or the final form. But in the case of Clang's pre-evolution Clink, it's obtainable in pretty much every game from Black and White up until Sword and Shield, and is currently absent from Generation 9. But as for those pesky elemental monkeys, they appeared in Pokemon Black and White 1 as a gift Pokemon to help you cover your starter Pokemon's weakness early on in the game, and that's the most memorable thing about them. All of them return in Pokemon X and Y and appear in the Santaloon Forest, as well as the Friend Safari, a feature you can't really use too easily anymore, then just didn't appear into a new game at all until Pokemon Legends ZA. Now for Generation 5 Pokemon specifically, they do get the short end of the stick when it comes to being remembered. However, if you look back to the Indigo Disc DLC in Scarlet and Violet, you literally travel to the Unova region in that part of the game, but so many Generation 5 Pokemon are just missing. I feel like the elemental monkeys would have been a great fit for the Indigo Disc DLC, but no, instead, the Gen 5 favorites like Scrafty, Excadrill, and Reuniclus, who are in every game, got called up again. Like, I get the elemental monkeys are bad, but so is Goldeen, and it's in nearly every single Pokemon game, despite there being countless other generic fish Pokemon that could easily take its spot. Like, we have Magikarp, Chinchou, Finian, Basculin, probably like 50 other fish that can just easily take its spot. Then the next Gen 5 Pokemon I want to talk about is, I meant Ducklet. I don't know why I just said duck in the original script. And I promise this is the last one for Gen 5, at least for now. I remember Ducklet having a lot of the limelight in Generation 5 for being that generation's meme Pokemon, at least ahead of Patrat. It's just a silly little duck Pokemon I'd see posted in memes back in like 2011 on various forum posts. Then it just barely appeared again after Generation 5, and you barely saw its memes anymore. They did linger on a little bit in Generation 6, but since Generation 7, who even cares about Ducklet? After the Gen 5 games, it only appeared in X and Y, Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, then in the Hidden Treasure of Area Zero DLC of Scarlet and Violet. I feel like it got completely wiped, since when it comes to water and flying type Pokemon, the most common Pokemon of that typing will be Wingull and its evolution Pelipper. Everybody loves these guys. They're pretty old and they're kind of nostalgic by this point. And then of course there's the actual duck Pokemon Psyduck, which is on my monitor right now because I'm actually in the Pokemon Center queue because buying Pokemon cards in 2026 is like entering the Hunger Games, and I hope I can get Pokemon cards this time. And I feel like that's the case for a lot of Pokemon from these middle generations who were forgotten. There were already Pokemon so similar to them that were just more liked. Why use Glameow when there's Meowth, one of the most iconic Pokemon? Why use Patrat over like Rattata or any other early route Pokemon that everybody already loves? I have 1 minute left in this Pokemon Center queue. I better get these cards. And that leads me to the next point of the video. Pokemon that were like kind of tossed to the side in favor of newer Pokemon that basically just did the same thing as them. A few weeks ago, I was watching one of my friends, Absolblog's Pokemon's videos, and he was shiny hunting for a Hypno in Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green as a part of his shiny badge quest. Hypno as well as Drowsy were very common in the Generation 1 Pokemon games and have appeared in nearly every game since, although it will become a lot less common over the years. If you look at Hypno's early Pokedex entries, a lot of them are rather creepy, like its Pokemon Yellow Dex entry saying to avoid eye contact because they'll put you to sleep. Not that creepy, but then in Gold version it gets even worse and says, when it is very hungry, it puts humans to sleep and then feasts on their dreams. In Fire Red, its Dex entry even alludes to how it once took a child away that it hypnotized, alluding to the Berry Forest mission on the Sevi Islands, but after Generation 3, Hypno's Dex entries got a lot more tame. Its Generation 5 Pokedex entries just say how it can put people to sleep in seconds, then by Generation 7, they got much tamer and a lot less dark. Oh my god, did I get through the queue? Queue's done, Pokemon cards required, but back to the video. Now in terms of Hypno being pushed to the side, this could be because in Generation 5 they released Musharna, which is basically the same Pokemon but looks way less creepy and is much more marketable. This is one of the points that Absolblog's Pokemon brought up in his video, and it makes a lot of sense. Drowsy and Musharna are both Psychic-type elephant Pokemon that revolve around sleep and dreams, and in Generation 5, Musharna even played a big role in the dream world and the whole dream stuff, which they could have just easily used Hypno for. Although I guess they couldn't have used Hypno because Gen 5's whole thing is new Pokemon only, but still, they already had a dream Pokemon, why make another? And then since Generation 5, Musharna has been the main focus for sleep Pokemon. It's in Pokemon Sleep, but Hypno isn't, and overall kind of just replaced Hypno. You could say a similar thing for Chansey. Chansey is most known for being the healer Pokemon, so to say, and is even seen next to Nurse Joy in the Pokemon Centers of Yellow version and the Let's Go games. Chansey isn't next to Nurse Joy in Fire Red and Leaf Green though, which I found kind of odd, since there is this gap of space in the Pokemon Center next to Nurse Joy that a Chansey could have easily fit in there like they did in Yellow version, but they just didn't do that. And then after Gen 5, Chansey kind of took a lot of the spotlight back from Audino, but it wasn't really seen as too much of a healer Pokemon anymore. I'm noticing a theme of Generation 5 Pokemon popping up in this video a lot, and the reason for that is because Generation 5 was kind of like a soft reboot for Pokemon, where it only featured new Unova Pokemon in the main story of Pokemon Black and White 1. A lot of these Pokemon were inspired by Generation 1 Pokemon like Musharna we mentioned earlier, as well as the Swoobat line being the new Zubat and Sawk and Throh being the new Fudding duo like Hitmonchan and Hitmonlee, among many others. They're both very similar Pokemon that fulfill very similar roles, but the Generation 6 and Generation 7 games didn't really put too much of a focus on any healer Pokemon for that matter. Then in Generation 8 with Pokemon Sword and Shield, they did this. Standing in the cafe portion of the Pokemon Center of the Galar region is Indeedee, a psychic and normal type Pokemon that appears in Pokemon Centers with little explanation. When I first saw Indeedee, I was convinced that it was an evolution to Audino. Sword and Shield feature a few other new evolutions to older Pokemon like Obstagoon, Cursula, and Rune. This isn't a YouTuber thing of me not pronouncing this Pokemon's name correctly, I just don't know how to say this guy's name. Runerigus? Rungarius? Rune guy. And with all of these Pokemon having new evolutions, it would just make sense for this new Pokemon that looks like Audino, which can also be found in the Pokemon Center, like the Pokemon Audino is based off of, to be an Audino evolution, but it just wasn't. I guess in hindsight, it would be weird to give a Mega Evolution a new evolution. I don't think they've ever done that where they gave like an old Mega just a regular evolution. I know they did do that with Gigantamax Pokemon like Duraludon got an evolution into Archaludon, which if you ask me is a downgrade. And also like, I feel like that's Pokemon trying to erase Gigantamaxes because like, who cares about Gigantamaxes? Like, I know Alomomola is the poster child for Pokemon that should have evolved from older Pokemon. In the case of Alomomola, it should have evolved from Love Disc. But the one that really keeps me up at night is Indeedee. It's even a part normal type. I know it has a more stark gender difference like Meowstic does from Generation 6, but both Audino and Indeedee were even designed by the same person, Saya Surara. I don't think I'm saying your name right. I'm terribly sorry, which might explain why they look so similar. I kind of got a bit off topic there, but I just wanted to show an example of a Pokemon that wasn't exactly forgotten, but more so thrown to the side in favor of another Pokemon, to then kind of just have that other Pokemon also be thrown to the side, because again, nobody cares about Audino. I'm sorry, Audino, but it's true. Then there's some Pokemon which, like, came out, were forgotten for a while, then came back to some sort of relevance. One such Pokemon is Gulpin and its evolution Swalot, which happened to be my favorite Pokemon. They debuted in Generation 3 with Ruby and Sapphire and were relatively common in the wild and amongst trainers. Then Gulpin was only found in the Great Marsh of Diamond and Pearl and Platinum, after getting the National Dex, was only found in Soul Silver through Swarms, and was kind of forgotten in Generation 4 and Generation 5. Then in X and Y, Team Flare Grunts just kind of randomly started using Gulpins and Swalots as sort of like their ace Pokemon, kind of like how like Team Rocket would use like Koffing or Zubat. This gave Gulpin and Swalot some more relevance, and they returned to Omega Ray and Alpha Sapphire, of course, since they first debuted in the Hoenn region originally. And then they wouldn't be catchable again until Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl in the Great March again, because, you know, they're remakes of Diamond and Pearl. Again, though, after only getting the National Pokedex. Gulpin next appeared in Scarlet and Violet as a Violet exclusive. I learned that the hard way, by the way, because I already started my copy of Scarlet, learned that Gulpin was exclusive to Violet, and then was like, well, I guess I'm just not using my favorite Pokemon. Then Gulpin wasn't in the base game of Legends EA until the Mega Dimension DLC a few months later, where it randomly played a pretty big role in the story again, sitting in the Hotel Z lobby while you make donuts, and was also catchable in Hyperspace Lumiose. I feel like Gulpin should have been in the base EA game since it played a big role in Pokemon X and Y, but that's just one example of a Pokemon becoming relevant again on like two separate situations. I'm also biased because, again, they're my favorite Pokemon and they've been featured more prominently on merch in the last couple of years, which is kind of nice. I know I have a different interpretation of forgotten Pokemon since most people think of like Lumineon being forgotten, but if you've played the Pokemon TCG in the last few years, then you would know that the Lumineon V card was a very powerful card seen in a wide variety of decks through the entire time that it was legal, which is a big reason why I don't see Lumineon as forgettable. I mainly want to focus on Pokemon that were kind of pushed to the side in the games, since Finneon and Lumineon actually appear in quite a few different Pokemon games, actually nearly every game since Diamond and Pearl. The only exceptions are X and Y, ZA, and Sword and Shield. And I guess the Let's Go games, but those don't really count because that's basically just a Gen 1 game. You can even encounter Finneon in the stormy beach of the Pokewalker for Heart Gold and Soul Silver. That might be a little bit of a deep cut, but if you're like me and you carry around your Pokewalker everywhere every day, then you probably battled Finneons here while trying to pick up Heart Scales or Quick Balls, which you can also find in this area. Then to consult some YouTube comments where I asked you guys to let me know some forgotten Pokemon, Monopoly Rubrics brought up an interesting point about Venomoth. It appears in many games along with Venonat, but strangely was only in the regional decks of the first two generations and in Scarlet and Violet. The more I look at it, most of Venonat's Met locations can only be found in the Kanto region. Venonat can't be found at all in Ruby and Sapphire, Black 2 and White 2, Sun and Moon, Sword and Shield, and Legends ZA. It's pretty rare for a Generation 1 Pokemon to be rare or forgotten like this, and while I don't see Venomoth or Venonat as a forgotten Pokemon, due to its prominent use in Kanto and the anime and of course like that whole Twitch Plays Pokemon thing, it just barely appears in other regions outside of Kanto, and I never realized it until somebody commented about it. The only other Gen 1 Pokemon I can think of that rivals Venonat on how few times it appeared outside of Kanto is Seal. Ethan Dollarhide commented, "When's the last time you thought to yourself, man, I really want to use a Dugong on my team?" Which actually like made me laugh, like shout out to my comments for being funny. But no one really cares about Dugong or Seal for that matter. It's a pretty rare Pokemon in the first two generations of Pokemon, only appearing in very select areas like the Whirl Islands or the Seafoam Islands. Then it just doesn't appear in later games much at all, or is only found in very specific areas. The last time Seal was included in a base game that wasn't a remake was Ultra and Ultra Moon, and it wasn't even in the base Sun and Moon games at all. Makes me feel old that I say that because I think, oh, Ultra and Ultra Moon's not that long ago. It was almost 9 years ago. Then for the Pokemon that I actually forget about a lot, Mothim. It's a split evolution from Burmy, except its counterpart, Morbidim, has 3 different forms, while Mothim only has 1, so like, they were kind of asking for it to be forgotten. Like, you know those memes of like Daniel and the cooler Daniel? Like, imagine that, but there's 3 cooler Daniels. Mothim itself actually isn't even catchable in any Pokemon game except for Pokemon Legends Arceus, and its pre-evolution Burmy only appears outside of the Sinnoh/Hisui region in a few select areas such as Headbutt Trees in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, after getting the National Dex, and on Route 3 in Kalos and in the Berry Farm. It actually might be unobtainable in the most games out of any Pokemon on this list, but I actually have this funny Burmy card on my desk, and I just like Wormadam. I think it's a funny Pokemon. I remember the first ever TCG tournament I went to was the Pokemon Secret Wonders pre-release back in, I guess, 2007 or 2008, and I just remember using this Burmy card and I liked it. I don't really forget about Wormadam personally, which I guess makes topics like this video a bit more difficult to discuss. Every Pokemon is someone's favorite, even you, Watchog, somehow, and you might have memories with a very specific niche Pokemon that the larger Pokemon fanbase just kind of forgot about. I tried narrowing it down to Pokemon that were uncatchable in a lot of main series games, or Pokemon that were just quietly replaced by other Pokemon like Hypno was, but let me know about other forgotten Pokemon like this in the comments down below, and in case you forgot to click that like and subscribe button, you should do it now. So, shout out to all these cool Patreon supporters. I'm really pushing the Patreon now. Having a fun time doing the watch along video. You guys should totally check it out. There's even a free tier on Patreon, and like, it's free. Why not check it out? So yeah, thanks for watching. I forgot my outro, which I guess is fitting for this video about forgetting things, so I'm just gonna walk away. Goodbye. I'll see you, I don't know, next week, same time, I guess. Bye.